Well, when I was in the service, people used to make fun of me because I didn't drink coffee. So
You drink the mud.
they thought I was a Mormon because I didn't drink coffee. I'm not. One thing doesn't have anything to do with the other. I just don't like coffee, it doesn't taste good. And caffeine doesn't do anything to me.
How many hours of sleep you get?
Now I get about 6.
I usually is.
Caffeine doesn't do anything to me. Never has. 6 is about average for me for most of my life. So I rarely get more than 6 hours. If I do, my hips get sore from laying there for such a long time. So we're talking about 10 principles of hormone action. Hormones interact with one another. The effects of one hormone can markedly be changed by the actions of another hormone. Another aspect, the chemical structure of a given hormone is similar to all vertebrates. The functions served across species can vary. It's really kind of interesting because we use insulin. We can use pig insulin. Turns out that swine are a lot like humans. Our immune systems are very similar. Our pheromones are very similar, as weird as that is. So you can look at studies where they determined that pig pheromones affect humans. So as it turns out, if you are a pig farmer and you have a boar who's breeding all the sows, then he will put off so much pheromones that the male will not put off very many pheromones, as strange as that sounds. So if you look at a pig farmer, usually they'll have 1 or 2 kids, whereas other farmers will have a dozen or half a dozen or whatever. But strangely, they don't have as much sex with their spouses as other farmers do, as other individuals do. It's just the weirdest stuff in the world. They did studies with this back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. After that, they stopped doing it.
Why would they, do you think, what's the reason why, like, they stopped?
They stopped doing it? Well,
Yeah.
they already had all
They
the
found the
answers.
answers.
Yeah, and it was kind of depressing too, so, I mean, it was kind of negative. And what use did it serve? You know, all we were determining was that the humans and pigs have very similar pheromones.
I wonder how they came across that from the beginning.
I'm guessing it was by observation, looking at all the pig farmers and going, why, you know, what's going on with you? Why are you different from everybody else? So usually what happened with the pig farmers, if they lived on a pig farm all their lives, a lot of times they were bachelors. But if they had become a pig farmer, usually they had their children before they started farming or before they got a boar or, you know, all kinds of weird stuff. We've done studies with pheromones where they have sprayed pheromone spray in a toilet stall, and then they observed in a male toilet stall, and then they observed the males going into the stall, and what they determined was that if there are pheromones, he's in red today. He's funny. He doesn't wear black because I made fun of him because he was wearing black. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh yeah. So they sprayed the pheromone spray in a select toilet stall. And then they observed the toilet stall. What they discovered was that men didn't want to go into that toilet stall because of the pheromone spray, because it smelled like a dominant male. So they used other toilet stalls, no matter how many there were, as bizarre as that is. I guess it's not that bizarre. I mean, if it stinks, you don't want to go in there. You'll go in someplace else.
Yeah.
You're afraid you'll pick up the smell, or the smell will follow get on your clothes. I know. Why did we stop doing research with this stuff? Well, it didn't mean anything. It didn't. And then there was a controversy over select groups of individuals who don't put off pheromones. So there was an argument as to whether they actually existed or not. who was I talking? Oh, Jeremiah. Jeremiah and I were having a conversation the other day. We were talking about pheromones, and he says he didn't believe that they existed. Well, he's right. They don't exist for him because he's Navajo. You guys have had arranged marriages for an extended length of time. But I have experienced pheromones consciously. Subconsciously, of course, you experience them from time to time. If you have the mechanisms, if you put off pheromones and if you are attracted to pheromones, then of course, possibly usually it's subconscious, but sometimes it can be conscious. And I've had conscious situations, and I'll tell you about them. Maybe if we get to pheromones, I'll tell you stories about my Japanese stewardesses, which sounds really sexy, except it turns out to be about as unsexy as you possibly can imagine. Japanese, yeah, I know, it gets really weird. The chemical structure of a given hormone is similar to in all vertebrates, and this is what we were talking about, the pigs. It turns out that the pig immune system is very similar to humans. When the Spanish first arrived here in the, when did they arrive here? They arrived here in the 15th century, but then they started exploring in the 16th century. They had an expedition, started in Florida and then went all the way into Kansas. So they traveled all through the Southwest. Well, they carried their food with them, and they carried their food in the form of pigs. So they herded pigs along the way. Well, some of these pigs escaped. And since pigs and humans have very similar immune systems, the diseases that the Spanish had, that they potentially were immune to, of course the pigs had, or they had a form of the virus or whatever. And the pigs infected turkeys, and the turkeys infected the people. So the next time they came through the area, it was the French that came down, they went into the southeast, and there weren't any people left. There were places where villages had been, but all the people were gone. They were all dead. They'd all died from all these diseases that were carried by the pigs. Some of these pigs, of course, escaped, and those pigs became the Razorbacks, the wild pigs of Arkansas. Well, Arkansas, Mississippi, and whatnot.
Decent football team. Decent.
Well, it's a good football team, but at the same time, we're talking about wild pigs. And of course, the pigs in Mexico escaped, and they became, I can't even think of the name, it starts with a J.
The Javelina?
Yeah, Javelina, that's the one.
Yeah, those things are freaking mean, man.
Yeah, but they were domesticated once upon a time.
Pretty big too.
Yeah, well, I mean, pigs come in all shapes and sizes. Back when we were raising pigs, well, actually we didn't raise pigs, my neighbor did. But when he was raising pigs, you tried to get as much fat on the pig as you possibly could. The more fat, the better off. It's fat back. It turns. You can make it into bacon. You know, it's all good stuff. Now, of course, most of our bacon is fairly lean. We don't use pig fat. We don't use lard anymore like we used to. Back in the 50s and 60s, a lot of people cooked with bacon grease and a lot of people cooked with lard, but they don't do that anymore, and I don't know why I'm talking about pigs. Okay, I'm talking about pigs because of the similarity between their hormones and ours. So we can use, and we have tried this, we have used pig hearts, trying to put them in human hearts, human chests, so that we could survive. Didn't work, but we do use pig tendons to correct certain torn tendons, especially in the knee. Usually that is a pig tendon that we're using. Because we don't reject it. Pigs are that close to us, genetically, or no, well, maybe not genetically, but hormonally, and their structure is very similar to ours. Their immune system is almost the same. And that's one of the reasons why so many indigenous people died in this country, in the Americas, is because of the pigs. They brought the pigs over. They brought the horses over. They brought cows over. They brought chickens over. They brought a lot of stuff over. but it was the pigs that killed people, because pigs and turkeys had similar immune systems. So they spread it to the turkeys, and of course almost all the indigenous people ate turkeys because they were such a large bird. They raised them, and of course, the rest is history, a very painful and ugly history. Hormones can affect only cells that possess a receptor protein that recognizes the hormone and alters cell function. In different vertebrates, the same brain regions often possess the same hormone receptors. So when we're talking about rats, or we're talking, and this is one of the reasons why we can do research on rats and we can apply it to humans, because their brain structure is very similar to humans. Same way with the pigs. The thing about the pigs, though, there's a reason why we don't use pigs, and it's because we are really close to each other. So they're afraid that they are going to produce or create a virus that is very devastating to humanity. Every year, the flu comes over from Asia. And the reason it comes over from Asia is because Asians raise a lot of pigs. And they raise pigs, they feed the pigs, they allow the pigs to eat in fields where they have used human feces to fertilize the fields. So they kind of trade viruses back and forth between the humans and the pigs. And that's where the flu comes from every year. And every year we have to try to figure out, is it A, is it B, what is the configuration? And every year unfortunately it's different. Sometimes we miss almost completely. What was it, like 4 years ago? We hit at 15%?
Yeah, because I know every year the flu shot we give, it's always different. It's never the same.
Never hits it on the nose.
The last 3 years, yeah.
It never comes anywhere close.
What does the flu shot do?
Well, the flu shot would work if we knew exactly what the configuration of this year's flu was going to be, but we never have any idea. So what they do is they speculate. They have a formula that they use to try to determine how much influenza A and how much influenza B there's going to be in the flu.
Is that the same concept like we go overseas, they give you the smallpox shot?
Are they still? They're not still giving you guys smallpox. Well, they gave you smallpox.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that was.
No,
They've eradicated it now. Well, they think they have.
They still do.
It was in.
My last one I got was 2012.
Okay. All right. Of course, I got it, but then I was.
That and anthrax.
Yeah. Well, anthrax.
But isn't it the same concept? Like they put a little bit in your system.
Right, yeah, they're trying to make you immune to that, just in case you come in contact with anthrax.
But is the same concept with the flu shot?
Flu shots, yeah, it's kind of the same situation. Very similar situation. Yeah, we're trying to make you immune to the flu, but the problem is if we give you too much A and not enough B, then you're going to get the flu anyway, because we never know what the configuration is going to be. And we always miss it by, and sometimes we miss it by a lot.
A lot, yeah.
A lot. And people get sick. I never get the flu shot for a couple different reasons.
I mean, I don't either, but
It always makes me sick.
it gets me sick.
Okay.
Shoot, you had to in the cervix, either the shot or the thing up your nose.
Yeah.
You had to.
Yeah, that was the last, actually the
Article
military,
15.
the military's the last time I had a flu shot. And I got sick as a horse. I got really sick. I never get sick. So that was the last time I was sick, actually. Neuro Communication works somewhat like an old wired telephone or telegraph system. Messages travel over fixed channels to precise destinations. The structure of the connections between neurons determines the transmission of information from one cell to another. And it's just like the old telephone system. You had to have a wire. The wire had to run to a certain spot, and when it ran to a certain spot, then you could communicate. But if there was no wire, then you couldn't communicate. There was no cell phones. There were no satellites. The only people that had satellites were the military. The military were using those satellites for targeting. That's where GIS and GPS came from. It's a targeting system used by the United States Air Force to target to target
For
their
smart.
anti-ballistic missiles. Well, that's where computers, that's where the internet came from. The internet came from the military. Military communicated using, what do they call them? Line of sight. Anyway, you had to have, not infrared, what was that stuff? Anyway, microwave. They used microwave to communicate. And they couldn't allow a civilian system, because if they allowed a civilian system, it might potentially interfere with the military system. So of course, we invented this stuff, and then nobody could use it but the military, as weird as that sounds. But anyway, for the longest time, the only way you could communicate in the United States was by telephone or telegraph, and there had to be a wire running from one place to the other. That's why the only way to call on the telephone was to grab the telephone on the wall, because there was a wire that ran out to a pole, and the pole ran out to someplace else, and then that ran, we had all these long distance lines that ran all the way around the United States. So we had all these poles all over the place. Some of them were electric poles, but some of them were telephone lines. And they were everywhere. And then they started burying the lines. Anyway. So there had to be a wire. If there wasn't a wire, there was no connection. And of course, that's the way neuro communication goes. One thing has to connect to the other. Now, this isn't the only system we have in our bodies. The endocrine communication works like a television broadcasting system. So it just sends it out, and the way it sends it out is it dumps it into your bloodstream. Then your blood will circulate in your body if you're not exercising or really excited. It takes about 3 minutes for all the blood to run through your body, which seems like it's relatively slow, but the reality is that if you've got an endocrine gland that is putting off hormones, wow, if they're putting off hormones, then it can take as long as a minute to 2 minutes for the information to get from one place to the other. Of course, the neural system is almost automatic. It takes nanoseconds for that to move, but for the endocrine system, it's like a television. So if you, and I've done this, I've watched television in California, and I've watched East Coast television. And if you watch it on one show, it's being broadcast from somewhere, but if you watch it on the East Coast, it's about a minute and a half ahead of West Coast television. Same program. You're getting about a minute to a minute and a half delay. As weird as that is. And it's because of this. It's because it takes time for it to get from one place to the other. Unless they have, and they do have transfers.
Is that where like they advertise a show, it'll say like at 11:35
Yeah.
or 11:33.
Right.
Instead of like 11 or 11:30.
Yeah, it drives me crazy because I watched The Late Show last night with Stephen Colbert. Elizabeth Warren was on last night. And I thought there was something going on. I don't think Colbert likes Elizabeth Warren, because he was pitching curveballs to her. It was bad. I thought it was bad. I listened to a lot of debates. I listened to a lot of politics, and he wasn't pitching her softballs. He was pitching her hardballs. It was rough. She had a rough time. Anyway, why did
But isn't he like that with everybody that comes onto his show?
I haven't
Unless he likes him.
I haven't noticed that. I like Elizabeth Warren. I think Elizabeth Warren would make a great president. So maybe I just noticed it with her. I'll watch the next time a candidate comes on. Louis. Anyway, so what was I going to say? Oh, so in Iowa, when I watch television, the Late Show comes on at 10:30. And when I watch it here from New Mexico, it comes on at 10:35. What the hell's going on? Why 5 minutes late? Why does it do that? And sometimes a television show will be 2 minutes late in California. Sometimes it will be 3 minutes late. It's just so bizarre. But if you watch it around Chicago, it's always on time. It's always right on the hour or the half hour. But, yeah, I don't know why it does that. There's probably a reason it doesn't have anything to do with what I'm thinking. Neural messages are very rapid and are measured in milliseconds. Hormonal messages are slow and are measured in seconds or even minutes because it takes such a long time for the information to get there. Most neural messages are all or none responses. Hormonal messages, on the other hand, are analog. In other words, it has to build up a certain amount. So you can have a small reaction or you can have a large reaction. A neural message, it's either all or none. It always fires and always fires the same amount. But of course, as far as the hormonal message is concerned, it is graded. Depends on how much hormones are put out. Neural responses are very often voluntary, while hormonal responses are not. Your glands fire. You don't know if they're doing that. Sometimes they misfire, and now we got a kind of a serious problem. That's what hypothyroidism or hyperthyroidism is all about. We have there's no way, and you can't control it physically, but neuronal messages, of course, you do control yourself. All these people walking past. Both systems store chemical transmitters for future release. Both systems are stimulated to respond by an outside source. Both systems are quite complex and maintain many differing chemical transmitters. Some hormones used by the endocrine system are also produced by neurons and are used as transmitters. Okay. So we have hormones that are also neurotransmitters, but of course the chemical transmitter for a neuron only works on a neuron. Both systems use transmitters that have specific receptors on the receiving target cells that respond to the stimulation. Both systems may produce a second messenger response in the targeted cells that brings about 2 levels of changes at the same time. It all depends on whether it's ionotropic or metabotropic. If it's metabotropic, it has a second messenger system, and sometimes it can create more than one message at the same time. Ionotropic, only one message. Very rapid, but it's only one message. The second messenger system, the metabotropic system, it can fire more than one message at a time. It's relatively slow because it takes place inside the cell. The ionotropic just passes through the membrane and then it fires. There's 3 different categories of hormones. There's protein hormones, amine hormones, and steroid hormones. The protein hormones and the amine hormones work on amino acids. Protein hormones are composed of strings of amino acids. Amine hormones are composed of a single amino acid. However, the steroid hormones are made up of 4 rings of carbon. 4 carbon rings. And that's how they work. So they have a different structure. You're not going to get one mixed up with the other. The protein hormones, of course, are a string of amino acids. You're not going to get them confused with the carbon rings. You're not going to get them confused with the single strand of amino acids. So they're totally different chemical structures. One's a string of amino acids, one is a single amino acid, and the other are those 4 interconnected carbon rings of carbon atoms. Okay, we're going to talk about the 3 different types. The effects of hormones. Hormones promote the proliferation, growth, and differentiation of cells. All the cells in your body are made up of protein. All the cells in your body are made up of amino acids. Something to remember. So amino acids are very important to your body structure. Your bones, all of your skin, all of the cells in your body are made up of proteins. So proteins are very important. So where do we get proteins? We get proteins from cholesterol. Okay. But unfortunately, sometimes, especially in modern times, we take in too much cholesterol. And if we take in too much cholesterol, then We can't utilize all of it, and some of it clogs up our arteries, and then we get a blood clot and die, or we get a blockage, and then we die. Thyroid hormones present at birth support brain development and growth, and we're going to see what that looks like if an individual, they have a genetic proclivity for hypothyroidism. This is okay as you get older, because we can give you a medication that takes care of it, but when you are a fetus, of course, there's not a whole lot we can do until after you're born. And by that time, we already have, your brain development is already stunted. And we'll talk about that in just a second. Hormones moderate cell activity. Gonadal hormones modulate the onset and the maintenance of secondary sexual characteristics with puberty. Probably you don't remember what you were like when you were in the first grade and second grade and third grade. The fact that you're a little bitty short guy, you didn't have any muscle mass, you were smaller than your brothers, older brothers and sisters, if you had older brothers and sisters. They started looking like men and women, and of course all the kids in your first and second and third grade class looked like little kids. They all had skinny arms, they all were tall and slender, they didn't have any muscle mass at all. Didn't matter how much work they did, they couldn't put on muscle. You couldn't exercise and become you couldn't be a bodybuilding 6-year-old. It just didn't, you couldn't put on muscle mass. That's the way it works. You didn't start putting on muscle mass until you started pumping testosterone through your system.
Sorry, this is a good question.
Go ahead.
When I was a drill sergeant, like, you know, as a PT test, you do weight and tape, right?
Sure.
If they were like overweight, then we had to send them to the clinic
Sure.
for thyroid.
Sure.
What does that have to do with the weight? Is it like just...
If you're hypothyroid, you gain weight, and you can't take it off.
That's just do the weight and tape. No, let's do surgery on it.
Yeah, well, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. If you had a skinny guy, you should have sent them for a really skinny guy who couldn't gain any weight at all. Then you should have sent him to the clinic for a thyroid test as well.
Yeah, they were like real over or real under.
Exactly. There you go. Because it is your thyroid that regulates these things. Most of us have a normal thyroid. It pumps out the adequate amount of T3 and T4. Our brains are putting off enough TSH, and we're all perfect. Aren't we all perfect? Close. We're all close. But if somebody that's hypothyroid, they're not putting out enough T3 or T4, then they're going to be overweight, and they're also going to be tired all the time. And that's part of they're going to be more sedentary because they just don't have any energy. And it's because they're hypothyroid. Somebody that's hyperthyroid, it's like they're on speed. You know, it's like they're smoking crack all the time. You can't slow them down. They don't want to sleep, and they're skinny as a minute.
One incident where the guy had a thyroid problem, but I actually saved him. First time I was about to chapter him out.
Right.
He goes, well, you're too big, you know. I'm
Sure.
like, well, hold on. It's not his fault, you know.
Right.
So I actually drove the doctor to the company. I was like, this is what's going on. The doctor explained. He goes, okay. 2 months later, he made his E6.
Sure.
So,
Well, there you go.
he just had to do a different PT test.
Right.
Instead of run, he walked,
Oh, okay.
you know?
Sure.
So,
Well, you need to do that. You need to determine if they got a thyroid problem. If they have a thyroid problem, we can fix it. And there's no reason not to fix it. Otherwise, you know, they're either going to be very sedentary and very heavy, or they're going to be very active and very skinny.
is it like a steroid or something you take, or?
We're going to talk about it in a second. It's a hormone. It's a series of hormones, and you have to have TSH. You have to have the TSH from your pituitary gland. You have to have which induces your thyroid to produce T3 and T4. The T3 and T4, of course, are what give you your energy, they allow you to put on muscle mass. But if you're hypothyroid, of course, you don't have any energy and you just keep gaining weight and there's not a whole lot you can do about it. So we have to monitor people's thyroids from time to time. It's kind of genetic. We'll talk about it in just a second. It's kind of fun. Protein hormones and most amine hormones bind to receptor molecules on the surface of the target cell membranes. This releases a second messenger in the cell because of the rapid process of protein binding. Protein and amine hormones tend to act very rapidly. And of course, that is the protein and amine hormones. Steroid hormones must pass through the cell membrane and bind to specific receptor proteins inside the cell. The combined steroid receptor complex then binds to the DNA inside the nucleus. The effect of the gene expression may increase the production of some proteins and decrease others. The second messenger system, let me see if I can get this thing to work. I couldn't get it to work last time. Maybe if I plug this in. Because this is a good video. If I can get it to work. Come on. There we go. Wait a minute. It's not going to work. Okay, sorry. It's a good video, so you might go on YouTube to look at this video. It's only a minute and a half or so. It's not very long. This one right here.
It won't play.
I can't get it to work. I can't get it to transmit from there to here.
Mm.
Okay, I can play it. I can watch it on my computer, but I can't get it to transmit to this thing. Okay, oh, I know, I need this. Okay, sorry about that. If we had a PowerPoint projector, I could do it, but we don't. This is a different system. Most of the hormone systems in the endocrine system control themselves through a negative feedback system. A gland detects a need to produce the hormone, so it produces the hormone. After the need is taken care of, the gland no longer is stimulated to the need, so it doesn't produce as much steroid or hormone. It just slows everything down. So it's a negative feedback system. A positive feedback system is where it fires until it detects that there is no more need, and then it just cuts it off. This one is modulated. So it goes heavily until the need is taken care of, and then it just slows down. But it still pumps out the same stuff. A positive feedback system is like pumping gas. You pump gas until the nozzle detects that there's enough gas in the gas tank, and then it just shuts off. But this isn't the same way. It would be like if you were needed to pee, so you went and you started peeing, and when you didn't feel the urge anymore, you'd still keep dripping out of your penis, but oh geez, that's a bad example, isn't it? You'd be leaking all over the place. That sounds horrible. Why should I use another example? And then it, of course, once your bladder's empty, and then it stops leaking, which I guess some people have that problem. Insulin's negative feedback loop. Glucose from a meal enters the bloodstream. The increased glucose triggers the pancreas to produce more insulin. The insulin enables the cells of the body to utilize the glucose for energy. As the level of glucose in the blood decreases, the pancreas is stimulated to produce less and less insulin. And of course, at that point, a balance is maintained, and so you don't have as much insulin in your system. We have insulin coming out of our systems almost all the time. Sometimes it's a tiny little bit, sometimes it's a lot, especially right after you ate. You'll have a lot of insulin being produced. If you're diabetic, of course, then you're using superficial insulin. I told you about my friend who was a diabetic, and he would try to anticipate how much alcohol he was going to drink. Then he would shoot himself up with an adequate amount of insulin to take care of the alcohol in his system. He was really smart, and he was able to feel how much, if he drank tequila, how much glucose was being produced or how much he needed. So he was really good at it. Eventually he killed himself, but it was because somebody talked him into drinking more than he was planning before he went. And then he tried to shoot himself up with more insulin. And at that point he was so inebriated that, he was so inebriated that his brain wasn't quite doing the formula correctly. So he kind of gave himself too much insulin. And he went into insulin shock and eventually died. I know, it's stupid, isn't it? He'd been doing this for years. He would go out and drink, and he would anticipate how much insulin he needed in order to maintain himself. And usually he was pretty close to being right on. And he would brag about how smart he was. Well, he was a really, really smart guy. But he was a really, really stupid guy at the same time.
Yeah.
Okay, because he died at 39. The pituitary gland rests in a depression of the skull directly behind the nasal cavity. The pituitary gland consists of two parts, the anterior pituitary and the posterior pituitary. Anterior, of course, means in front, and posterior means in back. The anterior portion of the pituitary gland is constructed of glandular tissue. The posterior pituitary is constructed of neural tissue. So it's almost like two different glands. Half of it, the back part is made out of neurons, and the front part is made up of glandular tissue. The pituitary gland is connected to the hypothalamus by a thin piece of tissue called the pituitary stalk, and as you can see, it's very, very small. This reminds me of the spleen. You've got a spleen, and it's connected to the rest of your body through a stalk. It just kind of hangs there in your chest cavity. It's right under your rib cage. It's protected by your ribs. That's your spleen, and your spleen cleans out your blood. It is a repository for extra red blood cells if you need them. But it's just connected with this really strange stalk. The problem is if you get hit in the chest too many times, you could rupture your spleen. And that's what happened to me. I was playing soccer and I got hit in the chest and it ruptured my spleen. And then I almost bled to death because it's a vein and an artery. And so when it popped, when he popped my spleen, it popped that thing off, I just started bleeding into my thorax. You can bleed out relatively quickly if your body doesn't slow down the bleeding, and that's what happened with me. Obviously, I didn't die. I was on the soccer field and I didn't die, so that's what happened. So when they went in, they figured, well, it was 28 hours later that they did the surgery. When they went in, they said, well, evidently there's not much damage. And then they went in and they couldn't even find anything in the spleen. The spleen had exploded. And I had two different hemorrhages. One right after it happened, and then I was getting ready to go to work and I lifted my arm up and it hemorrhaged again. Oh God, I thought I was going to die. Anyway, and I couldn't convince them that that there was something wrong because I was relatively skinny at the time, and they kept looking at me and saying, well, I don't think his stomach's distended at all. If he really had a ruptured spleen, he'd have all that blood in his thorax, that kind of thing. Of course, the doctor was as big as a toad, fat as a toad. So he's looking at me, and I'm in fairly good physical condition, and he didn't think that there was a problem. I know. All he needed to do was stick a needle in my thorax and draw out blood. That's all he needed to do. But he didn't do that. So it took him 28 hours to diagnose me with a ruptured spleen. But we're not talking about spleens here. We're talking about pituitary glands. Okay, and this is a stalk. This is the pituitary stalk. The axons of the hypothalamus reach into the pituitary gland, but only in the posterior pituitary, so it's only in the front. The axons from the supraoptic nucleus and the paraventricular nucleus of the hypothalamus stimulate the posterior pituitary gland to secrete oxytocin and arginine vasopressin. Vasopressin is the antidiuretic hormone. Oxytocin is the nesting hormone. Oxytocin tells people to do things like, like nest. It also induces the uterus to contract so that they go into labor. Oxytocin will stay with the woman after she has the baby, and it will tell her to release milk from her breasts. And if you've ever been around a lactating female, if the baby cries, the mother starts lactating. And that's the oxytocin that tells the brain it's is released from the pituitary gland, and it tells the mammary glands to start producing milk, and so they'll start leaking. Their breasts will start leaking.
And that's you said the posterior is where it's located? You said?
Yeah, possibly the posterior pituitary.
Posterior,
this portion
sorry.
right here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah, I was
Okay, so
looking
you-
at the example in the book. That's it.
Because of the vascular structure of the posterior pituitary, both oxytocin and vasopressin are rapidly released into the bloodstream. Vasopressin, of course, is the antidiuretic hormone. This hormone helps conserve water by inhibiting the formation of urine in the kidneys. Vasopressin is very important when you were in the desert, and you were in the desert. What? Did you go on 6
6
deployments?
tours.
Yeah. And Iraq and Afghanistan, two of the driest places in the world.
Actually, Afghanistan's more mountainous.
Yeah, but it's still pretty rocky. There's not a whole hell of a lot of green there, that's for sure. It's pretty
More
brown.
than Iraq.
Iraq is dry, is a desert.
It's a desert.
Yeah, it's a desert. Yeah, it's pretty dry. So one of the reasons you were able to survive in all 6 of those deployments, despite the fact you're in the 2 of the driest places in the world, not counting Saley, of course, it's pretty damn dry here too, but is because of your vasopressin. Your vasopressin was telling you to conserve water. So one of the things, I don't know if they told you that, well, I'm sure they told you not to pee. Didn't they tell you not to pee when you went out? Well, for one thing, that you were supposed to urinate. You're supposed to hold your water in.
Well,
It was an old trick that we used to use when I was,
we didn't have a choice. We had you know what Hesco baskets are, right?
yeah,
We ran out of food for about 4 days.
yeah.
And there was about 8 Hesco baskets that was separating us from them.
Oh,
That
wow.
was it.
Yeah, you would.
So we just had to do what we had to do.
Well, yeah, but they told you not to urinate to conserve water until
The
you
best
came
we
back.
could, yeah.
Until you came back. Yeah, that's what they told us too. It is stimulated by the areas of the supraoptic and paraventricular nucleuses that detect thirst and water needs, and these are the 2 areas of your pituitary gland that tell you when you're thirsty. And of course, it's easy to get thirsty. Were you guys, did they give you Camelbacks?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. They didn't have Camelbacks. We had to carry big bottles of water.
Well, they would have like, the local nationals would have like pallets of water brought out to us, but my command sergeant, they ain't drinking that. Who knows what the hell they're doing?
Oh, exactly.
Don't drink it.
They're probably either spitting.
So he had no freaking, his wife would like send like pallets of Fiji, so we drink the cold water.
Oh, that's good.
Okay.
That's good stuff.
Yeah,
Fiji's
expensive too.
Yeah, exactly. Surprised you didn't use wall. Well, you know, the reason they use those bottles is because they didn't break so easily. You know, you use these really cheap plastic, real thin plastic bottles, those things pop real easily. And I can imagine that's one of the reasons they use the Fiji bottles. They're square, they're rectangular.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And they're thicker. It's thicker.
Well, we just open them up, fill our Camelback, canteens, whatever.
Sure. Yeah, but if you use the weaker plastic, it would have probably popped.
Yeah.
Oxytocin, also produced by the posterior pituitary, is produced by the posterior pituitary. Oxytocin stimulates the contraction of the uterine wall that speeds up childbirth. Oxytocin also triggers the contraction of the cells in the mammary glands. That's what I was just talking about. This is why it takes 30 to 60 seconds. If the baby starts crying about 30 to 60 seconds later, then her breasts will start producing milk, in which case it starts leaking out or squirting out. While oxytocin allows other animals to reproduce, in humans it mediates sexual arousal and affection response. One of the reasons that mothers are so enamored with their babies right after they're born has to do with progesterone, but it also has to do with oxytocin. At one point, and of course you can give a cow a shot of oxytocin and they will stay with their calf. If they're not a very good mother, you can give them a shot of oxytocin. We thought maybe we could do this with humans, but it doesn't work. You know, if you got a bad mother, nothing's going to help. I mean, you can't give her a shot of oxytocin and make her want to take care of her babies.
Yeah.
Just the way it works. The anterior pituitary is made up of glandular cells, which is kind of sad. I mean, we back in the 50s and 60s, we had this myth that all women were good mothers. I don't know why we had that myth, but it's not true. It turns out it's not true. Either that or women stopped being good mothers in the 60s and 70s. I don't know if that has anything to do with it. Anyway, so we've done research looking at this. I had a friend who, this is in Montana. He raised heifers that were good mothers. So he raised a herd of cows that would always take care of their calves. Now, one of the problems that people that are raising cattle have is the fact that some cows aren't very good mothers. So they don't really abandon them. They just walk off and leave them. And the calves, of course, are asleep, and they're on one side of the meadow, and the calves are on the other side. And then the calf wakes up and starts bawling, and the cow doesn't respond. But these cows would stay with their calves. And of course, he made lots and lots of money by selling these cows. They were Herefords because they were good mothers. And not all Herefords are good mothers, I guess, is the way it worked. So his cows were being sought all over the United States because they lost fewer calves, which is always good. The anterior pituitary is made up of glandular cells rather than neural cells as posterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary is controlled by releasing hormones produced in the hypothalamus and are transported to the anterior pituitary through a network of capillaries called the hypothalamic pituitary portal system. So it stimulates the anterior pituitary, they produce the releasing hormones, and then they will induce the pituitary gland to produce another releasing hormone. Another hormone. I'll give you an example, I think. CRH, corticotropin releasing hormone, is produced in the anterior pituitary. It induces the posterior pituitary to produce ACTH. The ACTH then is transported to the adrenal glands, and that produces, then the corticosteroids are produced. Okay. So we have a releasing hormone produced in the front of the pituitary gland, induces the back of the pituitary gland to produce another releasing hormone, and of course, one goes from one place to the other. And she's got, she looks like an anime character. Yeah. Somebody just walked past, looks like an anime character. It was the weirdest thing, and I just put that on tape. I'm in trouble now. Okay, here we go. The corticotropin releasing hormone from the hypothalamus stimulates the pituitary gland to release adrenocorticotropin hormone, ACTH, that stimulates the adrenal gland to produce the corticosteroids. So it's produced here, then it induces the anterior, the posterior pituitary gland to produce the ACTH. ACTH is pumped into the into the blood supply. The blood supply then takes it to the adrenal glands, and at that point, of course, it induces the adrenal glands to produce corticosteroids. So we have the releasing hormone is produced in the front, then the secondary releasing hormone is produced in the posterior portion of the pituitary gland. That is released into the blood supply, and of course, that goes to wherever it's supposed to go. Same way with thyrotropin releasing hormone, TRH. It stimulates the pituitary gland, the posterior portion of the pituitary gland to produce TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, that stimulates the thyroid to release the thyroid hormones T3 and T4. So we have four hormones that we're dealing with. A releasing hormone that is produced in the front, then that induces the back of the pituitary to produce TSH. The TSH is pumped into the blood supply, and it travels all the way down to your thyroid gland, which is right next to your voice box. It's on both sides of your voice box. And then that induces the T3 and T4 production. So the front induces the back to produce a releasing hormone that is pumped into the blood supply, and that goes to the gland. Prolactin releasing peptide and prolactin inhibiting factor are produced by the hypothalamus to control the amount of prolactin released from the pituitary gland. Prolactin controls lactation in women, and this is how they're, and it's fairly complex. And this is one of the reasons why all women cannot can't breastfeed. Sometimes it's a relatively, the problem is, of course, not all women want to breastfeed, so we don't know how many of them do, but at one point it was relatively high, 10-15% of women could not lactate. And mainly it's because of this relatively complex structure that has to take place. The prolactin releasing hormone, prolactin inhibiting hormone, and sometimes we get it in the wrong combination. When I was young, I had a friend who had a baby, and despite the fact she was fairly buxom, she couldn't produce milk, as weird as that was. And she rued the fact she couldn't breastfeed. She got depressed because she couldn't breastfeed. So she bottle fed the baby. In the old days, of course, before they had milk that you could use to feed your baby, you had to find a wet nurse. You had to find somebody else who was breastfeeding or was lactating, and then they would breastfeed. In the South, they would find a slave that was lactating, and they would use her as the wet nurse. As weird as that sounds.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it is kind of strange. So all of these guys, they had slaves, but they were using them to breastfeed their children. So in essence, the immune systems that they produce, you get a lot of, you get your immunity from the milk. So they were getting their immunity from the African Americans instead of their mothers, as strange as that may seem. So they were really and you really connect yourself with the individual that you're breastfeeding from, the baby does.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there was this really strange dichotomy going on, where they were being raised by African Americans, yet they had this negative idea about African Americans, despite the fact that they were being.
I wonder if they have any research on that too. Do you think?
I doubt it. It's so old now.
Yeah. No, it's just interesting.
Yeah, it is. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
That all this took place. Yet at the same time, they could have such negative feelings about this select group of individuals that they could sell them back and forth and whatnot. It's one of the reasons why when you read a story from the 19th century and they're talking about somebody who was raised by a select individual, that person would stay with them for an extended length of time.
Yeah.
If you watch Gone with the Wind, for example, Scarlett is being raised by Mammy, the, Butterfly, no, it's not Butterfly McQueen, it's the other lady. Anyway, she's being raised by Mammy, who bosses her around a lot, and she hardly ever sees, well, I guess her mother's dead, but, so it's this African-American that's actually raising this child. And she has a lot, and they stay with each other throughout the entire movie. Mammy's always there. And you see this in almost all stories from that era. If somebody is from the South, they kept the person that was their wet nurse, the person that took care of them, their nanny in essence.
Do you think they, like, you know how the civil rights movement ended until like the 60s? Do you think it carried on until then?
I doubt it. Because they stopped doing that after slavery.
But they still had, like some people still had house
servants, I guess. Was it the same individual? You know,
it's like that movie, The Help. Have you seen that?
No.
It's about the maids of their African American maids in the South and how they still take care of the family and the kids. Yeah, it was I think like 5-6 years ago that movie came out. It's a really good movie.
I probably need to see that movie.
Yeah, watch it. Then you'll know what I'm talking about. That's what came to mind when you were talking about it.
I'm guessing my wife would want to see it. My wife's from Georgia.
Oh. I like Georgia.
I'm not saying I don't like Georgia. I married 2 women from Georgia. So.
Really?
Yeah.
Georgia's where my career started.
In Georgia? Fort Benning?
Fort Benning. And then I got released with drill sergeant school and ended up being a drill sergeant at Fort Benning.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, damn, man, it's like a black hole. You get up.
You can't get out of the place. Lots of trees, Fort Benning. Lots of trees.
I think it's because I've only been to Atlanta every time I went to Georgia, so.
Oh.
Benning's in freaking Columbus. It's like nothing
Yeah, Columbus
else,
is
man.
way down on the corner. Phoenix City is right across the river.
Nothing out there with trees.
Yeah, it's quite the forested area.
Yeah.
It's like the Leonard.
Well, we went to
Missouri?
Alpharetta as well, and what's the other small town? It's like 30 minutes from Atlanta to
Not Athens. That's an hour and a half.
Alpharetta,
Noonan,
Georgia.
Fayetteville. I'm going south.
I forget. It's not far from there though. I have a few friends that live there. That's why. So I visit them maybe.
I have relatives that live there. In-laws. They all live around Atlanta. Somatocrinin stimulates the somatostatin and somatostatin inhibits. These are produced by the hypothalamus to stimulate the pituitary gland to produce growth hormone, which controls bone growth, of course. If you have somebody that is undersized, a lot of times they will give them growth hormone to stimulate their growth. My family is not very big. I was the smallest person in my school until I was in the 3rd grade. And the only reason I was not any longer the smallest person is because my brother started that year. So he was the shortest person. And he was 2 years younger than I was. When I was in the 1st grade, 2nd graders used to pick me up and the girls used to pick me up and carry me around like a baby doll. That's how small I was. But my family's small. My mother's only 4 foot, was only 4'8". My dad's 5'7". I'm 5'7" now, so I've achieved something. I'm as tall as my dad was. So we were small, but nobody ever suggested we start taking growth hormone. Of course, there was no growth hormone back in the 50s. There was, but they didn't have any synthetic growth hormone.
Do they give that, like, do they start as early as like childbirth or as,
No.
like when do, it's like a normal age?
Well, what they normally do is they wait until puberty, and
Okay.
at puberty, if they don't grow, they have expectations as to how big people are supposed to be.
Yeah,
And at puberty, if they don't start growing after they start growing pubic hair and whatnot, then they will possibly give them growth hormone. I was working for a doctor in Oklahoma, and he's a big guy, and his wife was relatively big. And they had a son that he thought wasn't developing properly. So right at puberty, when he was like 13 or 14 years old, he started giving him growth hormone because he thought the kid was being picked on at school. So he thought, I don't know, he was kind of an idiot. He was a doctor, what can I say? Not the smartest guy in the world. Anyway, so he started giving him growth hormone, and then he had a growth spurt. Yeah, so what happened in his case was that his bones got longer than they should have been.
Mhm.
Okay, and he was tall, but he had long legs was his problem. He wasn't athletic. He was very uncoordinated, relatively uncoordinated.
My daughter's doing, she's 8 and she's like about 4 feet.
It's not bad being short. It's not the worst thing in the world, especially for a female. They should be okay.
No, she's tall though, for 8, she's tallest one in her class.
Oh, she's the tallest one in her
Yeah.
class. Well, there you go. Okay, well, okay. Well, certainly don't give her growth hormone. You'll make her taller than she needs to be. Anyway, he has a lot of problems with his bones break easily.
easily,
Yeah,
yeah.
because he doesn't, I don't know.
They're real brittle.
Well, it's not the fact that they're brittle, it's the fact that they're so long, they're longer than they're supposed to be, and his muscles, he gets himself into positions where they break. You know, normally, you know, you and I, somebody hits us, you know, we're running along, somebody hits us, no problem. Him, of course, he's got his leg in a strange position, somebody hits him and it snaps. It's not that they're brittle, it's the fact that they're not thick enough to support the muscle mass or
The
whatever.
density and maybe in there.
I'm sorry?
The density.
So does he just stay in the body?
Well, the density is fine, that's not really the problem. The problem is he gets it into a position where it's easily broken.
Okay, it's just like when he's standing awkwardly.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, everything's awkward for him.
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
very awkward. His legs are too long.
Yeah.
It's a problem. Gonadotropin-releasing hormone is produced by the hypothalamus, which stimulates the pituitary gland to produce luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormone. In the female, luteinizing LH stimulates the release of ova from the ovaries and prepares the uterine wall for implantation. FSH stimulates the secretion of estrogen and influences ova production. So LH and FSH have to do with the menstrual period as far as the female is concerned, but it also is very important to the male. The luteinizing hormone stimulates the testes to produce testosterone, and of course the more testosterone you have, the more masculine you are potentially. FSH influences sperm production. So in order for males to reproduce, the LH has to produce testosterone, has to induce the testes to produce testosterone, and the FSH has to influence the testes to produce sperm. Now the reality is that every second as males, we are producing, as adult males, unless you don't have testicles, you are producing about 35,000 sperm per second. Okay, that's the way it works. So there's a lot of this stuff going on. Now, there are other aspects that can change the production of your sperm. If you don't eat enough protein, for example. If you're sick, if you've got a fever, then you stop producing sperm. Other than that, I mean, on a normal day, if you're feeling fine and you've had enough water and you've been eating a balanced diet, you're producing about 35,000 sperm per second. which is a lot. Or is it a minute? I guess it's probably a minute. That seems like too many. Anyway, we have millions. We have millions. Potentially, and we're producing millions a day. So potentially, we could reproduce every day if we could find a viable female to reproduce. I know.
Sounds expensive.
Let somebody else pick.
Sounds expensive.
I know. But none of us are that studly, so we don't have to worry about it. The adrenal glands are situated on top of each kidney. Like the pituitary gland, the adrenal glands are divided into two portions. The adrenal cortex, which is the outer portion, is the cortex, and the medulla is the inner portion. The adrenal medulla releases amine hormones, epinephrine and norepinephrine, in response to the sympathetic nervous system. The adrenal glands are there for the sympathetic nervous system. So they produce adrenaline and noradrenaline in response to a need, a fight or flight situation. The adrenal cortex produces and secretes some of the steroid hormones. The adrenocorticoids, the glucocorticoids affect the metabolism of carbohydrates, and cortisol is an example of a glucocorticoid. So it's producing cortisol, and these are all in reaction to an emergency. The sympathetic nervous system is being activated. So your adrenal glands are for emergencies. Unfortunately, sometimes your adrenal glands are working despite the fact that it's not really an emergency, you're just stressed out. And stress will induce the adrenal glands to produce the adrenocorticoids and the glucocorticoids, specifically cortisol. And cortisol, of course, is the hormone that is produced in order to get you either fighting or fleeing, one of the two. Unfortunately, cortisol scars your blood vessels. It scars them. And since it scars them, then they become collection points for cholesterol. If you have too much cholesterol running through your system.
Really?
Yes, so stress can cause you to have a heart attack. This is how it does it. The cortisol scars the blood vessels. The blood vessels start accumulating excess cholesterol. Cholesterol starts blocking your blood vessel. And now you've got high blood pressure and with a potential heart attack.
I had a checkup that is my cholesterol's pretty good.
It's high? Okay. Did they give you a statin? Did they give you something to...
No, it's talking about, we need to eat this, and they put a bunch of fake food in it. Oh, I don't think that has nothing to do.
How old are you? You're in your 30s, right?
37.
Yeah. I don't know. Is that too early to give somebody a statin?
Well, I think a lot has to do.
It is kind of early,
I think a lot of it has to do with my, other stuff I got going on. From
Stress.
Sure. Of course, yeah, you're under a lot of stress.
And I'm already gory, so stress.
Well, yeah. So I mean, if he's under, I don't know. I'm not his doctor. I don't know. I think maybe
What's a stat?
statin reduces your cholesterol.
But the guy, I had to go to the dietitian guy, and he's all like, well, you eat this, and
Right.
I'm a man, I like to eat meat, I'm not gonna eat this much freaking meat, I'm sorry, no one's gonna eat that much freaking meat, okay?
Yes.
And he's just like, well, stress and all this, I'm like, I can't help it, man.
Yeah. So what he's trying to do, he's trying to get you to control your cholesterol with your diet before they start giving you something to control your cholesterol. Okay. Now the problem is, oh geez, do you have a GP? Do you have somebody that watches you? Do you have a doctor that you go to?
No, I just go to the freaking clinic,
Okay.
and they're kind of fucking rude over there.
Well, yeah, it's because you don't see the same doctor over and over again. So everybody has to meet you for the first time. And they look at what other doctors have done, and then they make their decision over what other doctors have decided.
Yeah.
At least with the VA, you have your team. And
Right.
They all freaking talk to each other.
Of course, it wasn't that way in the old days. In the old days,
So you hit or
every
miss.
time you went in, you saw a new doctor. Of course, he didn't care about you anyway. Okay. Okay. Okay, here's the deal. Okay, you've got high stress, you've got high cholesterol, and things are gonna pop if we're not careful.
I don't know. I mean, she said it's pretty high.
Right.
She got an appointment on the 27th
Well, let's find out how high it is.
to go.
But between Earlson and I, we will figure out what we need to do.
Will help.
No, what I'm saying is, okay, let's let them draw your cholesterol and let's see what it is. Okay?
Well, and after the course, she's like flipping out. So she's been.
Don't tell, she flips out about everything.
Yeah.
Family thing, I know her mom.
Oh, that's a whole other ballgame right there, man.
Oh, great, it's on tape. Don't watch this in front of court. Otherwise, I'm a dead man. Gonna come in with a gun. Second group of adrenal steroids is the mineral corticoids, which affect the ion concentration of sodium in the kidneys. Okay, this has to do with high blood pressure. If you have too much mineral corticoids, then you're very sensitive to sodium. And not everybody is. Some people, my daughter, you ought to see my daughter eat salt. Oh my God, it's like she bites off a chunk of rock salt.
Oh, yeah.
She's bad, but.
We use those rock salt in our ceremonies.
There you go.
Yeah.
She doesn't have a problem. So she doesn't have to worry about high blood pressure.
Yeah.
The salt does not affect her blood pressure, but some people are really sensitive to it. And those individuals, African Americans who were brought over here in slave ships, a lot of times the only reason they survived the trip from Africa to the Americas is because they had, they weren't given a lot of water, so they were less sensitive to, or they're more sensitive to sodium. So these individuals have to control their salt intake, or they have high blood pressure. Now, we already know that African Americans, not Africans, African Americans have a problem with high blood pressure. And it usually has to do with salt. So if they can reduce their salt intake, a lot of times they can control their blood pressure.
So is that what Native Americans, high blood pressure is like a big thing?
It's not salt though, is it?
I don't think it is. Well, like, okay, in my case, so when I get sick or get hurt really bad, like when I'm playing volleyball or when I'm running and I'm in severe pain,
Right.
my blood pressure goes up. Is that, and then,
That's logical.
yeah. Well, that's normal, right? But when some people come in and they say, oh, my blood pressure's gonna go up, but it stays up, and then is that like a case of something else, or is it because of the pain that they're going through still?
That's usually because of the pain. I mean, that's the shock that we're talking about when people go into shock. Well, the shock is because of the pain, it's because their blood pressure has stayed high. And of course, that's kind of a way that your body protects itself.
Yeah.
When you go into shock, your blood pressure tanks. It goes way, way down. And that's a good thing. Okay. Keeps you from blowing your brains out with blood. Okay. Now the difference, and
I'm trying to think.
Canadians don't sweat. You guys don't sweat hardly at all.
I sweat a lot.
Well, your a lot probably isn't very much at all.
Okay.
Okay. Not compared to me. I mean, I'm a white guy. White guys sweat. Black guys sweat. Okay.
I sweat, but I'm only half.
You're only half. So it's your hat that's sweating. It's your other half that's sweating. Okay. But if you get into a sweat with natives, geez, you guys hardly ever sweat at all. I mean, you don't sweat very much at all. And you don't put off much of an odor. But me, gee, many Christmas. Everybody knows I've been sweating. And black guys are the same way.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're talking about different genetic structures. We're talking about different, growing up in different environments. Even the people up north where it's really cold, they don't sweat hardly at all either. And they don't have much of an odor unless they've been drinking. And then Yeah, it's kind of a,
No.
it smells like
I don't know, the
ammonia.
smell is just, it's just not, it's gross.
No, it's normal, it's natural.
I saw my
I mean-
daddy's.
Your dad
He
is,
lives in Portland, and he drinks a lot.
then he smells like ammonia when he sweats.
Last time I saw him, we fought, so.
Is your dad Puerto Rican or?
No,
is
he's from
native?
Sawmill, he's native,
Yeah.
he's 100%.
Oh, okay. All right, you don't have to like the smell of sweat.
It
That's okay.
doesn't, smell of sweat doesn't bother me, I'm talking about the smell of alcohol.
Of
when
alcohol.
it comes off the person,
Well, you've worked too much in the hospital. In the
Yeah.
hospital, you go to the emergency room and,
every day, yeah.
oh, damn, what a smell. I only had a couple, everybody only had a couple. A couple of cases. The adrenal cortex also produces sex steroids. The chief sex steroid produced by the adrenal cortex is androstenedione. I hate that word.
What do you say?
Androstenedione.
Androstenedione. Okay.
Okay, I guess. The steroid, this is the steroid that Mark McGuire was, I don't know, you guys don't remember this is 20 years ago. You were probably 3 years old at the time when Mark McGuire broke the Major League home run record. Yeah, he was on this stuff. He was on androstenedione.
I was 17, man. I was like the heyday of freaking baseball.
Oh, was that right?
Right. Shoot, I remember when Kirby Puckett, I think it's 93, 94 World Series, the Twins won it. He hit that home run.
What?
Same thing with Joe Carter from the Toronto Blue Jays.
Right.
He hit a home run.
Big guy though.
On it.
Kirby Puckett's a little bitty guy.
Yeah, he's like 5'5".
Yeah, something like that, but he weighs 220 pounds.
But then Joe Carter, he was like almost 6 feet. And he just,
Big guy, big guy.
you know,
When he swung the bat, it looked like a toothpick. Joe Carter.
yeah, he was a big dude.
Androstenedione contributes to the adult hair growth patterns in men and women. An overabundance in a woman can lead to more masculine hair growth patterns. Of course, you can't really tell. She's not growing hair on her chest. This has to do with pubic hair, okay? Males and females have different pubic hair structures. Female pubic hair stays right around their pubic bone, but males will grow pubic hair to their navels. Okay, that's the male growth characteristics of pubic hair. And this is what will happen with a woman. So if you see a woman with, well, I don't know why you're looking at a woman's pubic hair, but if you see a woman's pubic hair that goes all the way up to her umbilicus, then she has a male pattern hair growth. And she has too much of this androstenedione.
Is that genetic?
Is it genetic? It can be. It can be genetic. Or she may be taking steroids. And this is a problem with women that take steroids so that they can gain muscle mass.
Yeah.
Okay. They start getting a male pattern growth. They also, the other male pattern growth, of course this is obvious in males, is baldness. Women very rarely are bald. Only if they have a male pattern hair growth. Women almost never grow hair on their chest, almost never. Men do, well, depending on your genetic structure. I don't have any hair on my chest, but there are some guys with lots and lots, Italians for example.
Oh, yeah.
Chest hair. Adrenal cortical, it's time to stop. Let's go ahead and stop right here. Now that I talked about pubic hair. And it's on tape, it's on television. I'm in trouble.